Good evening, everyone. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to present the next Visionary Award to my good friend, partner, legendary investor, and all-around great human being, Steve Jurvetson, AKA the J of DFJ. At DFJ, our motto is think big, and Steve is without a doubt one of the biggest thinkers I've ever had the pleasure to know. He combines a great intellect with an insatiable and infectious curiosity that drives him to explore the leading and sometimes bleeding edge of technology and build relationships with the inventors and entrepreneurs who are literally inventing the future. Steve's iconic investments have included Hotmail, Tesla, SpaceX, Planet, and Nervana, a remarkable hit list of not only terrific financial returns, but I think more importantly to Steve, of great companies that are making the world a better place. Now, if you ever come to the DFJ offices, you'll discover that Steve also manifests his love of technology as a collector of space artifacts, or space junk, as we sometimes disparagingly call it when another crate shows up and we have to find a place to put it. I have to chuckle when Steve walks through the lobby. I've seen him do this on many occasions. He'll walk up to one of these items and he'll adjust it ever so slightly, turning it, rotating it, moving it so that it is actually accurate, even devices that haven't been used for 20 or 25 years. And trust me, he can go on forever about any piece of the hundreds of pieces and tell you its history, the provenance, when it was used, how it was used. Let me just say, he really knows his space stuff. I was curious about Steve and when this fascination first manifested itself, and so I asked his mother, Tia, who's with us celebrating him tonight. She told me that when Steve was barely out of toddler stage, she one morning found him dismounting and disassembling the wall phone with a set of screwdrivers. I hope some of you at least remember wall phones. Recognizing that he was not the type of child to be entertained by typical toys, Tia found a new version of a toy store of sorts for him, the Phoenix City Dump. Steve loved nothing better than to go there and pick out to his heart's content discarded calculators, radios, televisions, motors, and all sorts of treasures that would find a new home in his backyard playhouse where he would take them apart and reassemble them into things that looked remarkably like the insides of rocket ships. So it's no wonder he delights in collecting the real stuff now. Before I hand this over to Steve, I also want to close with a final word about one of the other ways he manifests his interests and passions. Steve is a quiet but deeply engaged and generous philanthropist. He helped start 2 schools, Bullis Charter and Nueva High School, as a founding donor. He provides funding for a number of tech-related projects, particularly those that educate the next generation. And he's a huge supporter of land and wildlife conservation enterprises. And most recently, having given $10 million to the 1 Acre Fund, a fund that helps farmers in Africa, he supports people too. He puts the same curiosity and care into these investments as he does for our LPs, and the world is definitely a better place for it. So with that, I would like to welcome to the stage and congratulate and honor Mr. Steve Jurvetson.
Wow. Thank you so much, Heidi. I'm a little speechless and a little bit apologetic. I got in late directly from SpaceX up in Seattle, where I was today. But luckily, I made it in time despite some delays. And I've just been fascinated with what I've heard here. It's a great honor to be here. In many ways, I also feel a bit of like an imposer in that we work with visionaries every day as a venture capitalist. We invest in the people that forge the future and do incredible things. And if anything, as investors, the best we could hope for is to be an enthusiast and a cheerleader of the right visionary leaders to find the next jobs, the next Elon Musk, amongst thousands and tens of thousands of others who imagine that they are those people as well. And at times we may synthesize across several of those and find the trends, the themes, the fabric of technology and how it's warping and woofing the society that we live in. There's an interesting perspective I can share, perhaps, having invested in many of these technology companies trying to always invest in the next great technology wave, not just any one industry sector, but one after another. Everything from nanotech, where Don Eigler and I, about 10, 15 years ago, saw a lot of overlap in our investment interests, but many different industries over time. And it just so happens I've been doing this for about 20 years, which is, of course, the 20-year anniversary of this event. And as I look back 20 years, I was just starting in the venture business. That's when Hotmail and other things were happening. And frankly, the internet was the big thing 20 years ago. But more subtly, and it really didn't strike me until just a few years ago, how dramatically different it is today from 20 years ago. When we started in the venture business back then, there were semiconductor and computer companies, software companies, and biotech. That was pretty much it. You could invest in other sectors, but you would lose all of your money, like the automotive sector, right? There were many who tried, they all died, right? Not since Henry Ford has there been an IPO of a car company in America until Tesla. And so if you look today and we look around, it's strikingly different. Cars, rockets, satellites, those are just some of the ones in the introduction, but it goes deeper in our portfolio. Agriculture companies, synthetic biology companies, re-engineering life forms to make chemicals. Roughly every industry in the world is becoming an information technology business. The hardware businesses of the past, the sort of unattractive industrial business, are becoming software-defined hardware companies, and it's just a fountainhead of innovation. The pace of change accelerates, and the visionary leaders have an opportunity to make a meaningful change, right? In industries like aerospace and automotive, where they may not have been a new entrant for 20 or 30 years. So it's an incredibly exciting time to be around visionaries, betting on visionaries, and seeing how they can change the world. But in many ways, the scope of their ambition just continues to flabbergast me, right? We always talk about change in the world. In fact, our logo involves the delta, the scientist's little term for change in a globe, the world. So change the world is literally embodied in our logo. And that was a Steve Jobs mantra back in the day. But today, that scope has moved from, let's say, software and services companies that might think about a US market and maybe one day going global, to literally global businesses day one. In some cases, people even think about changing other worlds, not just our world, right, in terms of Mars colonization. So that is something that I think continually expands both our human circle of empathy and our capacity to make a difference, right? The world we live in today is a wonderfully great time for the new entrant, the small team, the visionary, to change everything, right? 20 years ago, would anyone have guessed that the most valuable car company in America would be in Silicon Valley? Right? 20 years ago, would you imagine that technology businesses like those you envision as being started by venture-backed startups would be taking on and winning in the most tried and true industries like the military-industrial complex? Right? It's kind of unfathomable. I think it's just a harbinger of what's to come. So let me just summarize and end with a comment that's only recently become apparent to me. When we try to figure out who to invest in, which investors are going to make the most meaningful impact in the world. Notice I haven't said those that will make the biggest profit, those that will make the quickest profit or the quickest return. In many ways, by shifting our focus away from what is the sure moneymaker to which mission do we most believe in? What is an inevitable future that may not be apparent to all? An inevitable future could be all vehicles will be electric, all vehicles will be autonomous, we'll have a Mars colonies and bases, perhaps on the moon as well. Those inevitable endpoints, those stars on the horizon to which we can aspire to achieve greatness, that motivates a team. That motivates a group of employees to do incredible things. That motivates customers and partners and everyone else in the value chain to want them to succeed, to cheer for their success, as we see with Tesla and SpaceX and many other companies. In fact, almost all the ones that we've been investing in of late. And so in many ways, by aiming indirectly at the mission, at those people who have a passion for founder-led businesses, and betting all on that, doing well economically is a byproduct. And so I've learned that from the entrepreneurs of late. That's something that I'm looking for, but I'm also trying to apply that in my own life. I've never sold a share of anything DFJ has invested in. I intend to donate all that to charity over time. And by, in a way, not focusing on money making in the venture business, but focusing on how can we make the most difference and make the most progress in the world, I think perhaps at that level as well, it might be a better way to, in fact, achieve something meaningful, something where at the end of our days we've achieved, dare we say, symbolic immortality in those works and acts that we've pursued. So with that, let me end and say thank you. Thank you, Heidi, for those incredible comments and opening words. Thank you so much to my mom, who's here today, my favorite 3D printer, I like to say. Yeah. Oh boy, she can squeeze a good one out. And my daughter, who's here, as well as my work partners. I see Josh here, and Bill Bryant, who came down from Seattle, and Mariana, who's recently joined us from Airbus, and Meredith, who I work closely with, and my fiancée, Genevieve, as well. Thank you so much for being here to support us all, and thank you so much for this award, and thank you to the forum.